Okay, it seems that we are live now. So let me check if the sound is okay.
Yes. You can hear me, right?
Sorry?
You can hear me well, I assume, I hope.
Yeah. We are live now. So let me check if the sound
I can't hear you, though.
is okay. Okay, perfect. Yeah. Now you can hear me.
Yes, I can. Yes, perfect.
Okay, fantastic. So the people is starting to getting in and we can start. Um,
Great.
well, first of all, thank you, Francesco, for doing this. It's a great honor for us to have you in this lineup. We have uh, last week the presentation of Charles Waldheim, and we're going to have the next week a presentation by um, the director of the Landscape Urbanism program of the Architectural Association. Um, so I'm gonna I'm gonna do a brief presentation of Francesco and Openfabric, and then Francesco is going to present the latest work of the studio of the office, and hopefully then we can engage in a conversation regarding the work. So thank you very much for doing this, Francesco. Francesco Garofalo was born in France and moved to the Netherlands, where he founded Openfabric, office specialized in landscape architecture for contemporary cities, with a special focus on complex social dynamics and public urban spaces. Francesco studied landscape architecture in Van Hal, Larenstein, Arnhem, the Netherlands, and in Genoa University, where he graduated cum laude in 2009. Since he founded Openfabric Office for Urban Landscape Architecture, he has led various awarded competitions and some ongoing commissions. Amongst others, we can find a proposal for uh, New Tahrir Square in Cairo, in Egypt, an AIDS Memorial Park in New York, a renewal of the main boulevard in Genoa, an urban square realized in The Hague, the Netherlands, a landscape proposal for Pingdi Low Carbon Campus in Shenzhen, China, among many, many others. Openfabric is a landscape architecture and urban practice based in Rotterdam um, and Milan, founded in 2011 by Francesco. The office is composed by an international team of diverse professionals, active locally and globally, with projects extending in more than 20 countries in 5 different continents. Their clients span from public administrations in Amsterdam, Milan, Moscou, Paris, Shanghai, to private clients and organizations. So, again, it's an honor to have you, Francesco. It's nice to meet you. It's the first time we can talk. So, welcome to the Institute. It's all yours.
Santiago, thank you so much. Well, thank you for a kind introduction, and thank you for the invitation. Very happy to be here with you, although not in person, as mentioned in the pre-lecture. Hopefully next time we have a chance to meet together. I've never been to Argentina. I've been to Latin America a few times for work mainly, but looking forward to any opportunities of meeting you all in person. So really happy to be here amongst fantastic guests you have invited. Charles, AA director, people I have a chance to meet, and Charles, I think I will meet very soon in the future. So great to be here. I'll jump into the presentation very quick to show you a little bit of our latest work. Santiago, if connection is bad, you WhatsApp me. I have it in front of me.
Yes, of course.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Okay. I can hear my voice though. Okay, no, not now. All right, so, the presentation I've prepared for you today, which I'll try to keep, within 1 hour, even a little less, so we have time to have a quick chat if you feel like, is based, let me share this properly. Well, okay. It's a presentation I have prepared based on an exhibition we did literally 2 days ago in Genova, in Italy. So I had a chance to have, some of these pieces photographed, and I thought it would be nice actually to show you our work starting from this little exhibition time we had, which is, a little bit of indulgence we have to, for ourselves, take some time, reflect, produce some, physical outcome to describe a little bit our work and not just to stick, let's say, behind our laptops. So Shaping the Void is the lecture of today and was the title of the exhibition. Well, Santiago already introduced Openfabric, but it's, quickly to mention, landscape architecture and urbanism practice, delving into research and design of open spaces. We're based in Róterdam and Milán, and I always like to say that we engage with a large number of projects which differ from typologies, geographies, and size, big times. So, as an example, we are currently studying the Mediterranean Sea as a site of investigation and dialectical thinking. And we also work on the small scale of materials. So here you can see the two extremes. Everything which is in between and refers to open spaces is part of our interest. I like to say that we deal with food, we deal with gastronomy. So we work with rural landscapes, using gastronomy as a lens to understand and potentially to enforce and work and develop rural landscapes. And as a last, let's say, picture showcasing a little bit, my profile, I'm engaging with academy. I am visiting professor in Milan at the Politecnico, and from August I'll be working at GSD, so Harvard Graduate School of Design, with a project on New York City, specifically on Rikers Island. So the exhibition I mentioned that lasted till yesterday, literally, is the one you can see now. Very small space, a space with a space of some friends we used to collaborate with, and we had a chance to show 8 of our work with no interest in showing realized work, but just fragments of ideas, of reflections that somehow are part of our daily routine as Openfabric. So once again, 8 artifacts, 8 objects to describe a little bit our work, which we have developing now about 10 years of work. First of all is what we call continuous sculpture, which is this. It's a project we are working on now on Milan. So it's the Art Academy of Milan, the very well-known Brera Academy, which is now developing and moving for expansion at the railway yards, which are now abandoned. So what we are doing here is we are taking the platform of the railway, which, as you can imagine, is a very simple extrusion in concrete, and we are applying subtraction and deformations to it. So because the academy will move there with sculptural classes and ateliers, in our intention was to develop and is to develop a continuous culture. So it's not only hosting sculptures, but landscape can be a sculpture as such. Isamu Noguchi, above all, as a long-lasting reference of how to sculpt, to deform and generate, well, mainly in this case, playscapes, which can all be accessible not by having specific objects, but using landscape as a whole as an accessible and playful space. So this is number one. It refers to me to, let's say, an interest of ours of working in everything which is related to stage design. Let's say, if our intention is to somehow elevate daily life as a performance, and therefore we treat and we perceive and we design landscapes and say, especially urban spaces, as urban stages where daily life again becomes special. And we do this in some cases and in some of our projects very literally. So we take the main ingredients of theater design and stage design, and we turn it as much as we can into reality. So we have the stage, we have the space for audience, we have lights, and we have the fly system, which is this infrastructure which stands above the stage, where you can hang scenography or sound system and so on. A quick example, in Italy in 2022, when we have been called to work on a theater, on the open spaces of a theater, we had a chance to do a strategy for the renovation, I would say, of the old district. But I think specifically interesting was to develop and to delve our attention on the back of house. So I'm sure you all know what a back of house is where the logistics, loading and unloading, where everything that needs to be hidden is placed. Well, what we try to do is to change this paradigm to have a front and a back. Not by turning a back into a front, but by enhancing the quality of the side activities. I mean, imagine how interesting, how interesting, especially for many groups, but I'm thinking about kids especially, to see these big trucks loading and unloading, big pieces of scenography. It's pretty dramatic. And we believe it could and somehow it should be part of the spectacle. So in this, which is a much larger scale vision, we are addressing here to use stage design devices such as the lighting in order to really make this into the stage. So behind the curtains, behind the scene becomes once again a stage where things can be displayed and people can look and can enjoy a part of urban life which is usually hidden. With the idea of theater, of stage, of everyday life, we have applied to this other project, a bunch of small pocket spaces we have realized in 2020. This is one of those where we have taken some of these elements in the form of an audience with these grandstands and in the form of a stage. Extremely simple design ingredients, yet very effective in creating an opportunity for people to be visible and enjoy the moment. I always point out, you can see in the right-hand side of the square, these bike traces, which I say this because I saw it with my eyes, that people, it's not only kids love it, because of course you have water jets and it's fun and it's interactive, but also not kids and older ones on their commute from home to work and vice versa, they sort of enter and slalom into these water jets. So again, it's a game for everyone. This is another project which is unpublished because we're literally receiving, finally, we are realizing it right now, South Italy, which also is somehow similar, or well, very similar in terms of ingredients to this. This was a couple of weeks ago. The pocket space here is this one on the top of the image. But interestingly enough, it was actually closed. So people here sort of crashed in because they wanted to get inside and enjoy the sunset, because this is the perfect place for sunset. And it is a stage and it is a grandstand. In this case, the orientation, the shape follows different morphology, but the concept is the very same. This project is based on an intuition, which is the following. This square was sloping, was a car parking, and it was sloping. So what we proposed to the municipality was to level it down just to keep the minimum slope in order to have a proper drainage. And with this new space gained, we could carve out these 3 steps. And again, you can see it from here, but this is what happens at the sunset. So it's the place to be, to have a drink and to enjoy, the red-colored sunset. So we wanted to make this into a device where you can really enjoy it, and it could become a place for multiple and flexible uses. Another theater quartered designed we did was when we got invited to work on Gorky Park in Moscow in 16, 17 in a project that we called Theater of Wonders. People know Gorky Park is a very important and interesting and super culturally rich place, I would say, on the planet, which stands in Russia, in Moscow. We used to have very good collaboration in Russia, which we do not have anymore, as you can imagine. But we had a chance to engage on this place, which was well known to be somehow the ultimate ground for experimentations of Russian avant-gardes in the 20s and 30s. So somehow we wanted to learn from them, to mimic, which we did in the form of this superstructure, like about 300 meters long superstructure adjacent to the waterfront in the form of a truss system, which for us is a device to expand and concentrate activities below this metal canopy, and to expand public space supply, because as a matter of fact, we are multiplying the surface of usable space. But it is not usable as intended as a place you can walk. It is usable because it's a place where you can hang things. And as you remember from the first diagram, this is the fly system. And again, it's pretty literally the fly system applies to open space. We had a chance back in the days to collaborate with Bolshoi Theater Stage Lighter in order, once again, to generate a concept which could be deeply rooted in perceiving this place as a linear, extra large urban stage, a place, a container without walls, without ceiling, because this is of course only a truss, an open structure where events could be organized, but above all, a place for everyday life. We, during this competition, we also addressed the possibility of an app, a smartphone application where anyone could rent his own light. So someone could go there and rent his personal light to do whatever they wanted, play guitar, sing, play sports, whatever, everything. It was something supposed to be for everybody. This presentation is touching upon very different topics. As I told you, is part of this exhibition that I really wanted to structure like fragments. So there is connection between all these projects. It was not, and it is not my priority to create a story. If there is a story, if there is coherency, well, you will tell me, maybe today or maybe another day, but this was not my goal. My goal is to give you like a sort of pretty hectic picture of what we do. Okay, one of these topics we are researching and we are working on, and I would say we are trying to analyze and somehow negate, in this case, is hostile architecture. Hostile architecture is what you see here. We, inhabitants of cities, we all know what this is. All these devices meant to take people away or meant to force people not to use a place in certain ways. It's specifically addressed to homeless people, but not only. I think about skaters. I think about big groups. It's the design of discomfort, but it's more than that. It's the design of segregation, because when you move away someone, that someone has to move somewhere else. And applied to an urban scale, that means segregation to a city level. So though it looks small and very specific and very located, in a certain context, it's actually its effects, the consequences of hostile architecture are of much larger scale. So one of the installations we did in Shaping the Void installation was Sitting on Spikes, which is a project we did 3 years ago of understanding what hostile architecture means and its in social and spatial implication. So what we did here, it's a sort of interesting, or I would say almost funny exercise, which is we gave for granted for a couple of days in an internal, workshop, you may say, we gave hostile architecture for granted. We said, well, let's say this, let's use all these techniques that hostile architecture displays in order to create our set of sitting elements. But we wanted to stress them, to make them even more grotesque by enhancing all these little tricks like, pointy shapes, curvatures, fragmentation, sloping sides, isolation. All of that applied to this set of 12 little benches, which of course are not meant to be realized. They're meant to do the very opposite, to highlight, to bring some attention to the fact that we give for granted and therefore we accept what we see in urban context, which is design exclusion. What really sort of, I find it, dangerous to, an incredible extent, if I think as a designer, is that these objects, Max Wayne called them the anti-objects. They are thought, they are designed, they are, let's say, defined in their details for the capacity to not do something, to limit their use, which is probably the very opposite of what a designer would like to do. Someone would like we do, or definitely say we perceive open public spaces as an opportunity of creating spaces, furnitures, conditioned to enhance possibilities, not to limit them. So the very opposite of what hostile architecture does. So this is visible in a couple of our projects which were meant to maximize uses. Let's say Into the Wild, 2012, our first realized project in The Hague, the Netherlands, a playground, 100 by 100 meters, made by this artificial interior, natural inner core, and an architectural sort of artifact, this ribbon, which divides and works as a threshold between these two different systems. And this ribbon, we have put it, up and down, up to becoming a climbing wall. And here you can see the contrast between these two words and how, the users, kids in this case, sort of enjoying it. I like this image and this image in their capacity of showing we, and I would say how we work in the very opposite direction of hostile architecture of force. We generate things, spaces, conditions to maximize opportunities. By planting a tree at 45 degrees, it turned into an object to climb for kids. Or we could not place water for many reasons. So what we did, we just dig some ground. Well, in Holland, in the Netherlands, it rains sufficiently to collect and to have some water. And well, the picture doesn't lie in showing that some users do enjoy it a lot. Anyway, it's difficult to forecast how users will use a space. And my point is we should almost not even do this exercise. Our duty could be, and in my case, in our case, it is the one of empowering people to use the space the way they like to, within respect, within safety. But it's up to them, it's up to the final user how to live their life, and not up to me as a designer. And this is an exercise you will see in a couple of projects I'm showing today. Well, again, that used to be the anti-object hostile architecture. This is the very opposite, this detail. We use a metal tube as a curve between the flat part and the sloping part of the ribbon, which is clearly taken from skate parks, skate design. And as soon as we open this playground, which is not a skate park, it's a skateable place, but it's not meant to be only for any group. It's meant to be for as many groups as possible. Well, as soon as we open it, it was stormed by skaters, and I think it was selected like the best skate spot in the country a couple of years after it was inaugurated and open to the public. Another playground. So from The Hague to Amsterdam, here it's different setting. It's a modernist neighborhood where we designed, but we literally reuse play objects we could find in the surroundings in the form of what I like to call an open air playground museum. These are the materialities and color palettes we have adopted, and this is the plan. So you can see we have the grids of trees, then this voids, which we populated by extending the grid with objects which we painted many reasons in orange and blue. until it was open to the public. And here you can see again, like in The Hague, our use of this pattern, which is, in some cases it addresses specific uses, but in other cases it does not address specific use. By creating a pattern, people can start using the space, making up their own rules. So we do not give rules, that's a game, but we allow the opportunity of independent, creative play as a continuous playscape. Here you can see some of the objects, some have a specific use, some other less. And we really did work on a level of abstraction in order to create something which was, capable of generating conditions like this one, which means having people being free to interpret and therefore to use, once again, as they wish and as they want, their space. I specifically like this picture of lamppost. This is the lamppost, which is the default lamppost in Amsterdam. But because we place it in a grid, we colored it, making it part of this, landscape of objects equally distanced. It became for people, for users, for kids, automatically a place of fun, a place to, where everything was part of the game, let's say. And therefore they started to climb on lampposts too. And as you can imagine, you don't see kids climbing in Amsterdam lampposts usually, but it just worked because it was inserted in a certain context. Also, like very much this picture, we painted the old table tennis blue, and by getting rid of this line, it really became something where people could do anything but table tennis, and I believe that was a great achievement. Well, a couple of years later, I learned about this book, about this photography project from Tomizayu Ayahisa, the diverse daily life for ping pong table. So this photographer in Berlin, Japanese photographer in Berlin, he had this table tennis in front of his house. So for 1 or 2 years, he took pictures of what was happening at this table tennis, how they used it. And you can see it was used, and these are just a short selection. It got used in so many ways. Everything, I would say, but playing table tennis on a traditional way. And this is how I like to perceive public spaces. Once again, is devices, elements that can trigger curiosity and independent thinking, and places that do not limit the use. Everything is possible. And we, as designers, try to generate spaces of infinite possibilities. This is applicable to the scale of a table tennis, but it's also applicable to much larger scales. This is a project we are working on now. We are in construction sites in Reggio Emilia. Started in 2018 in the form of a two-phased competition, where we applied the notion of the palimpsest. You probably are very much aware of the notion of the palimpsest. Anyway, is seeing a landscape as a set of traces, tangible and non-tangible, which overlap to each other, visible and invisible. Is understanding the complexity of territories. And what we do here, I would say what we try to do as usual, is to delve, to research, to study all these possible traces and make them emerge, and making that accessible, so not limiting the opportunity to create new traces and new uses and new appropriation of spaces. It's not an archaeological site. It's a place of coexistence of different time span within one spatial organization, and in this case, in the form of a 26 hectares park. So here we did, a simple timeline of how many past this park had. It used to be known for this. So for a couple of decades in the 18th century, it used to be this, private domain, a garden designed through the principles of, French landscaping. It actually was even called Little Versailles by the locals. So, and somehow also the competition wanted us to reflect on this, on how to, reimagine this garden, which once again existed only for 20 years. This is what is, this was the condition until we started construction sites. Tabula rasa, empty space, almost an empty space. With this diagram, we want to say there was, of course, it used to be a little Versailles, but it used to be way more than that, way more clustered in one sort of empty, which is actually all but empty, is full. And our design wants to mention, to pay tribute to all these different histories. We generated this plan, which I can very quickly describe as a box and as a container. This is a box. This is the outer boulevard, which makes everything connected and accessible in the form of an intensely designed line. You can see furniture, light posts, double tree lines, a wall, which connects different destinations. This is one, and this is another one in the form of a reinterpretation of the former parterre. In the fountains are not reinterpretation, but are spaces which we, furniture, elements, water features that we are recreating based on what used to be. So we went there in the beginning of construction sites, February 2022. We had the construction company digging, and now there is a whole work of bringing those fountains to life, but on a very contemporary way, just a little thin water mirror effects on these two very large fountains, which are in the front at the entrance. You can see them here. Well, that was a box. The container, the content, sorry, that was a container, the box. This is the content. Is what we call the Central Park. It's a rural landscape. It's a portion of the local landscape made and turned into an accessible public park. We are on a flat, plain territory, so we felt the need of having some objects, some pergolas in this case, which could punctuate the landscape with three-dimensional objects to give a sense of scale, of pattern, and of depth. And this is hopefully how it will look like very soon. And this somehow is a final goal. So the Central Park for us, it's a platform. It's a platform for infinite possible uses. But in this case, given the dimension, it can be an instrument for the community to organize events, non-events, anything from the very small to the very, very large, from festivals to agricultural lands to land art installations, sculpture park, and so on. This is the park I used to look like 2 years ago, a few pixels, okay? And here you can see construction site. This is the foundation ground for the pergolas. Here you can see everything which is usually hidden behind the surface. So all the infrastructures which need to be there to support a public park. We have finally planted trees, not yet, grasses, perennials, shrubs, which will come in the form of thousands and thousands of species. But here you can see the metal curb and the trees finally planted. That was literally less than a month ago. And here you can see some drawn pictures. So you saw this is how it used to be. And this is how it starts to look now. So this new morphology starts to appear. And well, finally, it looks a little bit like what we had in mind for so long time. What is special to me of this central part of the content? It's a very diffuse landscape. I mentioned rural landscape, but I would say above all, blooming fields. So I wanted, and we wanted, to give the opportunity of people to access to, say, to the country. The most of the time we can enjoy and see the country, well, especially in the places I'm acquainted to, but it's more difficult to enter and to access because, as a matter of fact, they're private lands. So we wanted to give this opportunity to people, and we did this with this pattern, with this morphology, which will be defined by different blooming colors. So it was a long-lasting work of selection with different experts of very rich seed mix, which could create a highly spectacular blooming fields, which with time will appear with different colors. And here you can see this literally pictures from of a week ago. You can see all these poppies, but not only poppies. And finally, you can see the boulevard, the outer boulevard, and the blooming fields on the right-hand side. And this is a picture from the drone. So you can see finally patterns appearing, and you can see they have, in this case, the red was the first one to become visible, but there are more colors, more blooming tonalities to emerge very soon. All right, weather station project, again, another fragment is something we're working on now, also for this project, but we felt the urge of working on datas. As you can see in the project so far, and as you will see in the coming projects, we engage with very large projects. And I mean, not only like Reggio, but we have the fortune to work on regional plans, where you can really, where the changing climate can be experienced in a very direct and dramatic way. So this is one of the reasons, like we discuss, we work, we want to react to a changing climate, which we know how current, how let's say, how dramatic is for our communities, and especially for some communities. Yet, this notion is based on the collection of data, and the collection of data is made by instruments which very often are hidden. we worked for this weather station supplier, and he was telling us how the most of the investment goes on creating weather stations which are smaller in order to make them not visible, which somehow it's a little strange because they do something which is very important, but it's very exciting. You can see speed of the wind. You have all the different instruments. From water collection, wind direction, humidity, temperature, air pressure, and so on. So we believe there is a chance, and this is what we're working on, to make that part of urban landscapes, to integrate weather stations within cities, and possibly turn them into furnitures. No, I don't want to say not only in something accepted, but in something exciting, something proud and visible, which is a collection of data which tells us a little more about climate change, but a little more about weather. We all look at weather forecasts, and this is how they're generated, a huge amount of these stations throughout the planet. I hope you can see in our project, in all the projects you have seen today so far, it's a will of exposing things which are usually not visible. You can see this with the weather station, and you can see this in this material, which is a terrazzo. So, it's concrete. You have fragments of different granites and stones, which are then polished and rendered visible. It's a section of these different elements which emerge because they're cut through, and they emerge with all, the main features, and they become recognizable. There is a beautiful book by Jane Hudson, which is called Reciprocal Landscapes, which describes the fact that when you think about a material, about a space, we are always, all of them have a reference to another landscape. So if you see granite bench, that granite is coming from somewhere else. Same for woods, same for sands, same for trees. Trees are grown into a tree nursery. Who knows how distant from the place of, let's say, consumption. And this link between places of production or place of extraction and place of consumption, it's a hidden link. So I believe terrazzo has this beautiful capacity of exposing these materials, triggering, above all, curiosity. People start to wonder what is one of these elements and what is the other element. And therefore, it's an input. It's a first couple of steps to recreate and retrace that connection between place of use and place of extraction, which is now hidden and difficult to perceive. And when I think about landscape of production, imagine, how many extraction quarries in Argentina, for instance, and in so many other countries. And it's not only about places, obviously, it's also about the communities, it's about the workers, it's about people that work and depend on this, they depend to this economy. So this was realized in the form of an installation first, of a material first, secondly, on an installation, and soon to come, it will become the material of the furnitures of Reggio di Rivalta, the large park I showed you earlier. All right, still wanna take few minutes to describe you a couple of projects. I'll try to stick within 10 minutes. This is landscape strategy for Genova. Well, Genova has a very strong link with Buenos Aires. Genova is what I call my city, the city where I grew up, the city where I live part of my life. But it's definitely a city I think I belong to. Well, I guess it's not very dissimilar to very urban context, though it's small scale. We have been called by the municipality to develop a landscape strategy for the overall city. I don't want to spend too much time on the strategy itself, but I would like to tell you a little about what is a foundation and how, somehow this is similar projects to the weather station or to the Terrazzo abstract Lia, which, apparently have very little to share. I say it is similar because they are projects based on critical observation. In this case, it's a study on urban morphologies. It's about finding different parameters in order to define and understand the city a little bit on a deeper way, trying to come, to define categories which were able to embrace similarities, but also the common criticalities, and I especially think about environmental criticalities. So the outcome of this critical standpoint on the city was a definition of 6 cities. So our argument was and is Genova can be seen as 6 cities in one. It's an uphill city, it's a plain city, it's a compact city, it's a garden city, it's an agricultural city, and is an archipelago city. These 6 cities coexist to each other, and trust me, this viewpoint, this reading, this projective cartography enhance new relations which are all but visible now. So it unifies because they share similar, I would say very similar features, places which are usually not related to each other because of distance above all. So uphill city is this, this is somehow one of the postcards picture from Genova. And here you can see the extension and the fragmentation of the uphill city typology. Plain city. Genova is definitely not known as a flat city. It is not, but parts of the city are actually sitting on flat areas. And this happens where you have rivers, dry rivers, riverbeds, which makes clear Genova has a huge hydrological issue with, flash floods and, consequent floods of the city, which happen in very dramatic ways, on almost 5-year cycle. What is interesting is because they do not only share opportunities. I mean, imagine which kind of opportunities has a flat city. Well, for instance, a continuous, capillary, dense bike network, larger road system, and therefore the opportunity of implementing tree lines, flat roofs, courtyards, and so on. But they also share environmental hazards risk. And therefore, by defining guidelines, we can exploit opportunities, but also mitigate the risk. Compact city is the one of the medieval historical center, which is concentrated more or less in the very center. The all eastern parts of the city is what we call the garden city, is above 80% private land. So it's a city which is actually a private city. And it's 3-4 districts, neighborhoods next to each other. We calculated how, the green canopy, the green of this area, and it's 80% private. So also this made clear how privates would have a very important role in the ecology of cities and of Geneva. So it's not only, though my client was a city, it is not only in the city, in the hands, let's say, of the public administration, but privates do have a huge role to create a city which is, able to provide ecosystem services and generates fabric which can mitigate risk and generate new opportunities of green public space in the city. There is fifth city is agricultural city. So interestingly enough, and I would say surprisingly for this case, there is a pretty important and extended agricultural pattern in the city. And then we have the archipelago city, exceptions, cemeteries, hospitals, new developments, post-war developments. Just to mention a few examples, islands detached from the very context with a potential, but that needs to be treated as archipelago, as independent entities. Okay, just wanna finish soon as promised, that you have some questions if you have. But this was developed into a large set of guidelines of how this space and of how the city could change, and how to frame a landscape strategy based on these critical standpoints of the six cities, and this is the outcome. I would say, above all, to me, and what I feel, what I feel is counterintuitive, is to imagine not the city as a set of ecological infrastructure, but is to imagine the whole city as an ecological corridor. It's about generating a porous city. Each district has a role and can have a role, and it is not about excluding these green corridors out of the urban context. It's about, well, for sure, finding some ecological infrastructures, but also imagining the city as an infrastructure and of an ecological infrastructure as a whole. Let me see, I have way too many things here, as you can see. Well, because I just don't have time for all of that, otherwise I will just hijack you for the whole day. I'll touch base on the other objects of the exhibition. Another object we show on one of these fragments was Ailanthus. You probably know Ailanthus. To me, it's a very fascinating plant. It's a very fascinating plant because its history, well, is, or at least the human relation to Ailanthus, since it was brought to Europe in the 18th century. So it was brought for the silk industry to Europe and it was a moment of colonization epoch, which gave a huge boost to seed collectors and also this incredible botanical gardens, well, Kew Gardens in London, above all. But what happens is this tree, as you probably know it, I assume. I'm not sure how common this is in Buenos Aires, for instance, but it became an invasive species, and therefore now it is forbidden to plant it. It's a tree that needs to be cut as soon as it grows. But as a matter of fact, it's one of the only trees which is able to grow in critical contexts, in polluted ground, in leftover spaces. And therefore, it generates forests where other trees cannot grow. I don't want to state if this is a good or bad thing, or if we should use it or not use it. I mean, not for now. But what I like to highlight is a very complex history and so many possible analogies with human nature and of, well, colonial lands which have been counter-colonized by a tree which now they do not want anymore. And which is something very visible in its common name. It's called Tree of Heaven in Malaysia, where it used to come from, and it's called Tree of Hell in Europe. So you can quickly understand how different perception on this species. It generates some issues, of course. It most likely win the competition with other local indigenous species and therefore decrease biodiversity. But it is a species, once again, that grows where other species usually do not. And what I also like this analogy of seeing how it works as a weapon towards to the mineral city. It really goes into the cracks, it dismantles asphalt and tarmac, it disgregates the city. So I like to see it as an ultimate call for reducing impermeable paved urban areas towards a more hybrid space, which gives room for nature to grow. Polluted grounds brings me to the notion of grounds. We landscape architects, I would say architects, urbanists, usually and traditionally do not really think and engage with the underground. It's more like the status quo, the condition and the starting point of a certain site and context. So, landscape architects do plant trees on a certain ground. Architects do dig parkings, foundations, and so on into the ground, but very little wondering about what ground is and what grounds are. There are obviously so many different grounds which can retain an incredibly high amount of biodiversity, which is something we have also developed and showcased in the exhibition. It's not only about biodiversity, it's ground, soil has an incredible capacity to stock CO2, for instance. So it is a call to raise awareness and interest on looking below the surface. And that brings me to the last project, just because I have too many, once again, which is a treetop trail we developed in Georgia in 2019 for the Worldwide Fund, WWF. A treetop trail is, it's a path from which to look at a forest or tree canopy and to enjoy the trees from a different standpoint, usually above. Traditionally, you take an elevator or a staircase, you go above the tree and you enjoy the view, which is great. But, well, also in line with this sort of fascination I have on the ground and looking deeper, it can be related to a much larger understanding of profession, of my profession, which still gives a little too little attention to verticality. Let's say this project, because it unfolds as a continuous ramp from underground to above trees canopy, it gives opportunity to visitors to enjoy the vertical extension of the forest ecosystem. You have the ground, you have the underground, you have ground covering, little plants, little shrubs, small trees, big trees, and so on. It's an incredible richness of forest ecosystem, which is way beyond the top view. I would say thank you so much. Thank you for the interest. I think I've been a little too long.
No, it's perfect, Francesco. Thank to you. I think my camera is not working. Let me see.
I've stopped sharing so I can see as well.
Yes. Let me see if I can make my camera work. There you are. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Francesco, for this very generous presentation. It was amazing to see all these works. I have a couple of questions. Maybe the people here or in YouTube want to ask any question. You can do it through the chat box, and I can elaborate from Francesco. I would like to start with a little general question about the history of the discipline, because I can saw a series of references in your work. I don't know, the first one that came to mind was Arquisum, when you showed this first project that is like this linear platform where activities like activate in it, and then even in the theater project, the plans, they look like these module squares that work for Arquisum, but then you show the perspective view, and these squares were in the ceiling. It was like a structure that was above the floor, but the same concept applies, like this, that activates a series of activities. And I was wondering, what is the role of the history of the discipline of architecture or landscape in your work? How much research into past and historical projects do you do for your projects, for your designs?
Yeah, very good question. And thank you for your question. You see, I can see your point in seeing Arquisum. I mean, the name, of course, of this continuous sculpture also wants to a little bit refer to that. But in this case, it's just a little gimmick, let's say. When it comes to references, of course, we use many, and we use many from the architecture past and rich heritage that we have around, and we can look at and we can refer to. But I would say, at the end of the day, most inspiring and guiding work somehow come to me from art. Although we are not, let's say, I don't believe we do art. I mean, we do spaces, something very pragmatic. but I find best reference, for instance, I mentioned a couple, Isamu Noguchi. I mean, his bronze-made playgrounds of continuous playscapes. And his beautiful New York history of him trying to realize with a sculpture artist to try to realize as many playgrounds as possible, but without managing it and he left as a legacy these incredible little objects. To me, this is a guiding reference, for instance. I think about Walter de Maria, if I think about the ground, so this minimalism, land art, to me is of guiding importance. Capacity to address a message, to keep ingredients very simple. It's something that Walter de Maria was very, incredibly powerful in doing without, let's say, always trying to create a sense of surprise, a sense of excitement. So I think, when it comes to landscape architecture to urbanism, which is, what I do, we know the ecological responsibility we have, and we should have, and we should, bring as integrated in any projects. But I think this should not be alternative to creating, something moving, something exciting, something fun. So that's why sometimes I try to detach from something which is, rightfully 100% based on creating a better planet, because I would say we should integrate this and we should give this for granted. Everything we do should respond to this. But I also would like to think about creating better communities and creating, the joy of coming together. And therefore, I think that's why I usually somehow, let's say, end up in references which are non-traditional in that sense.
Right. Okay, we have some questions here. I will read them to you. I have one comment that says from Facu Serpili. He says, first of all, amazing work and such an interesting talk. I found really interesting how there is a little bit of what you call scalable spaces in various of your projects, something that I'm really into and found really inspiring. Might be a particular question, might not be a particular question, but just wanted to know if it is just a coincidence or skate vision of the urban space is something present in your design process.
Yeah. Let's say I do not skate. I mean, I did when I was a kid, but it's not like that I have an expertise. And I always try to avoid to refer to a singular group. Like, once again, I mean, with skaters maybe it's a little bit easier, but with kids it's even more difficult to make it clear to clients and to communities. So I don't want to design playgrounds for kids. I think playgrounds are also for kids, but we all play, whatever and regardless of the age. Public spaces are for play. It's just about changing your own way of playing and enjoying public space. So I always try not to refer to singular groups. So I do not have specific fascinations. I mean, I do have, but I don't want to project this notion of, making a ranking of specific groups. Said this, I think skaters are a very interesting group because, and again, like this question Facus Billy is asking is about skatable spaces. So not skate parks, but it's about the possibility and how a city lends itself to a possibility. And the skates, of course, it's a device where everything is usable. So it's not about fragmented spaces. It's not about doing something there, and there. When you have your skateboard and people that know how to do a skateboard, everything becomes part of the game. So this is what interests me. So I think it's a very special group in the sense that it's capable of showing very clearly this continuous landscape usability, because a bench becomes something to play. Is that right or wrong? I think it's okay, but I don't want to say it's right or wrong. But it's a perfect test and stress case where to evaluate how flexible, how generous a public space can be.
Great. Thank you, Francesco, for that. Here we have another question from Andrea. He says, very interesting the talk. A lot of unexpected ideas appear during the in those public spaces. She's asking if unexpected activities appear in those spaces. I think she's referring to these skatable surfaces. Maybe there are these kids like climbing into the poles, into the lighting poles. Maybe there are more radical, unexpected activities that appear there.
More radical activities happening in these public spaces. Right? Do I understand the condition right?
Yeah.
The question right?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, for sure. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely, yes. There are more happening. I just didn't bring it to the table, but let's say, I mean, anything, literally. I learned recently, I've kind of forgot about that, but in the Grid Grounds project, the one in Amsterdam with red and orange elements, it became the setting of a hip-hop, a rap video in Amsterdam from pretty well-known rap bands. But what is interesting, that they were singing about the square. So they were not only using it as a background, but the topic was how, that space was their place. I mean, I say there in a good way. So, sense of belonging, the place where to gather and to meet. So yeah, plenty of other uses. I think the point is to see this opportunity of maximizing uses not only from an anthropocentric point of view. So I'm happy, and that's also the way I've described it, as a place for people to do many different things, but it's also a place for dynamics, natural dynamics of many kinds. There are places for climate change mitigation, a place that can be flood, the place for biodiversity, of animal encounters, a space for migrations of different kinds, the place that can go through time. I always like to say how, especially our Amsterdam project is aging. It's in a suburban area, and people have decided to write some graffiti and to do stuff. Well, it's aging beautifully with all these scratches and things. Let's say many things happening, and I think our concentration goes and my interest goes in making a place for also different kind of phenomena to be host there. So I mean, today, maybe because I've especially focused on how communities, how people use a space, maybe I didn't touch sufficiently into how nature, which of course includes people, but nature as a whole is a protagonist of these spaces. But next time.
Well, we have here a connected question from Agus. She's asking, how is the process of designing these elements, these objects, without knowing exactly how are they going to be used? You know, it's like the opposite. I am thinking about the opposite of thinking this hostile architecture. Like, you know exactly what this architecture is not designed for, but how do you design an object that is open to multiple different kind of unexpected activities?
Yeah, actually, it's a very good question, but I would say I have a very simple answer. It's simple in the way I frame it, but I think the background, the experience, which leads me to answer this way, it's made of a couple of realized projects, and I would say abstraction. So it's about trying to divide a little bit these elements from specific uses. Let's say if you see a bench, you're probably gonna sit. If you see a swing, you're probably gonna swing. If you see a slide, you're probably gonna slide. Well, if you see a pyramid, yeah, you start to expand opportunities. If to me, it's about creating unfunctional elements, and in the term that when you create functional elements, you kind of restrain the uses to the given function, but that's not what I want to do. So I'm trying to exercise and to experiment into more abstract ways of designing spaces. And I think the next step is to generate dysfunctional elements. So sometimes designing the mistake, the mismatch, also generates some really interesting opportunities.
That's a great answer. Yeah, that's fantastic. I used to say to my students that you should like postpone the final function of things and work in an abstract context in order to generate much more possibilities. You know, if you go with I think that what you're trying to say is that if you go with a specific function, with a specific objective, you're going to close the gap of possibility that the project is presenting. So I really like that answer. Well, Agustina is saying thank you, so she liked it too. Okay, Francesco, and we can let you go. I know you're tired. You've been traveling, so I just want to ask one more. Is that I believe that in your work I would like to have a week to think about what you present and watch it again in order to process. But from the glimpse that I had in your presentation, I see that you are managing a series of techniques in your projects. Some of the techniques are we were talking about, like these elements placed in the landscape that are maybe used in one way or another, so they activate this or that function regarding the people that are using them. And something similar happens with these platform projects that you presented that work in a more subtle way using abstract conditions. And there is another technique that I could see, that is these architectural artifacts, like the first project that you show in Amsterdam, if I'm not mistaken. That is this complex object that it's not that it is a platform, but it irradiates maybe functions and activities towards the context, and it transforms the context in some way. So I was wondering, and then there is the palimpsest technique and the the analysis that you've presented from Genova. That was amazing. But I was wondering, in which cases do you feel, or what are the clues that you find in the project or in the site that makes you decide what technique to use, and which one will be more effective, or which one will be more transcendent for the site and the activities in that context?
Yeah, it's a difficult question. Let's say after 10 years of Openfabric, I think there is a little bit of intuition that I try to elaborate in having a feeling of what and how to, let's say, well, to respond to different conditions. So somehow the experience helps in that sense, because I have a set of techniques, of ways I approach sites, which of course is part of my background, and it's emerging while I'm observing and trying to delve and researching into a site. Well, the exercise, and I swear it is actually and it's absolutely anti-effective and very time-consuming, is to try to approach every single site as different. Because maybe the condition is similar to something I've experienced earlier, but the context is different. Maybe the context, the social context is similar, but the climate, the environmental conditions are different. So I try to really take all the projects not for granted and not try to apply, let's say, methodologies. Of course, the line of thinking, that was my question in the beginning. Maybe you can read something, and I think you did, and I'm happy because I agree. There is a certain, approach which you can read, in different projects, but I'm trying not to. I'm trying to, again, to look with clear sights every time, enjoy somehow the excitement of not knowing how to approach and to intervene into a project. I know it's a detail because this is about graphics, but I always like to mention that we always almost always draw new trees and plants for our drawings. Let's say, usually you would say, well, you come out with your graphic representational style, you have your things, you use your trees, but actually I like the idea of redrawing that every time. And I think it's interesting for many reasons, but if I think about plants, it always gives you an opportunity of seeing plants as an ingredient which is very multifold as an outcome, as a role. Let's say there was a project which I didn't manage to show you, where we retrace and redraw all the root system of trees. And by redrawing the root systems, of course, we learn and we understand the root systems of different trees, but we also address the topic of, let's say, the protection of ground with a system of roots. So, again, trying to come up with new solution every time. And I think if there is a common trace to be seen, like you did, is by looking backwards. Indeed, on the long run, you can see similarities, but the daily routine is made of, let's say, trying to reinvent the wheel every week or so.
Okay, Francesco, thank you very much for your answers, for your presentation. It was fantastic to get to know you and your work firsthand. So thank you very much for taking your time. We are going to transcribe this. We want to publish it in our magazine, and we hope to keep in touch to see that going. So thank you very much for taking the time, and very, very nice to meet you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Great talking to you. Thank you for the